Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akil, and if you're interested in peer-to-peer software, this episode is for you. And I don't mean Skype, WhatsApp, or Zoom. I mean applications that run on my phone, my device, straight to yours, without anything in the middle. Joining me today is David Mark Clements, author of Pear Runtime over at Holepunch, the peer-to-peer company. I love his energy, I love his stories, and he's doing some fascinating stuff. So enjoy. When I looked into peer-to-peer technologies, I did some researching and I looked for really good examples of this technology because I wanted to kind of understand the pros and cons of it. And the examples that I got were kind of Skype, Zoom, and WhatsApp. And I'm like, okay, that is peer-to-peer, but there's always a middleman there involved.
Yeah, see, that's the whole thing where Facebook and so on, they went from private messages to direct messages. Or one way or the other, I don't remember. But like either way, like this idea that the message is direct is a lie. That's a lie. It's not direct.
Exactly.
Like you're at the very least, it's sophistry. You're twisting words to indicate something to the user. So that's the thing, is that many users think that Keet, which is our messaging app built on Pear, many users think that apps already work like that.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to make the app that we think should work like that, because we agree that's how apps should work. And the reason users think that they should work like that is because the companies with all of the money have made sure that the average user does think like that, because that's actually how it should be.
But then what is the difference? Because I understand with my technology background that if I send a message on my phone and then I log in on my laptop and the messages appear, that obviously there's something in the middle that just relays then the message back to me.
Yes.
Right. But that's not the peer-to-peer technology that you're operating in. Or
no. So with Keet, we have this thing called identity.
Yeah.
And it's quite similar to a Bitcoin wallet address. You have 24 words that you record and store. And then we create sub-identities from that identity. Actually, well, we haven't gotten into the tech yet. But I think later we should talk about the peer-to-peer authoring with identity.
Okay.
But that's a rabbit trail. So there's in order to discover other peers, there's something called the distributed hash table, which is nodes. All peers can be nodes in the DHT. All of our peers can be nodes in the DHT, and they just help you discover other peers by a given key.
What do you mean by DHT?
DHT is a distributed hash table.
Gotcha.
So it's a way of allowing peers to discover each other through a peer-to-peer network.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that as the central point if you like, but that central point is actually, you're inside the central point. So it's not a central point.
No.
Does that make sense? Because you're participating, you're one of the nodes maybe.
Gotcha.
Maybe not maybe, right?
Yeah.
So with identity, you create that key for yourself, and then when you log on to when you don't log on, sorry, but when you open the Keet desktop app and you've already set up your identity on the Keet mobile app, for instance, you can then scan, or let's say the other way around, you set it up on desktop, you can then scan the QR code from desktop to mobile that just transmits your identity to it, which is again just like a cryptographic key, and then that is then used to allow synchronization of state between your devices peer-to-peer, and they each discover each other through the DHT.
Yeah.
So there is no central server that's saying like, oh, he sent this message, I'm storing this message, and when they log in to the central service, they'll be able to see the message stored on our servers.
Yeah.
That's not what we're doing. It's only ever device to device.
Only on the device itself.
Yeah.
What would be the main benefit then? Because I never thought of this. I downloaded Keet because I wanted to talk to you. And then I downloaded it on a laptop probably where I shouldn't have downloaded it. So I wanted to get rid of it. But then I needed the messages and I needed our chat room basically. So I transferred it to my other laptop. I did exactly what you said. I tried logging in. I set up my identity. I filled in the identity on the other laptop. I only had to do a confirmation basically on my initial account.
Yeah.
And that was it. Then it was connected.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's separate from the server where I would just have an account. I would log in and that would be that.
Yeah.
I actually had to pair these devices.
Right.
Yeah. But why would I want that in the first place?
Well, it goes back to why you would want local state on your device in the first place. So, but you don't have to set up identity on Keet. You could just have a separate desktop and a separate mobile app and then the application or the device itself is the identity, right? You join them up because you want your state to sync between devices, right? So it's really about the local state thing in the first place. So the way that Pear applications work, and Keet is a Pear application, so this is the generic thing. They work on a technology called hypercore, and hypercore is an append-only log. So that log, everything that you do in the application, all the actions you take are appended to this log. So when you send messages, it's appended to the log. If you like, it's appended to the log. If you delete, it's appended to the log. So deletes are known, right? And then that state is private to you. No one else can see that state. So you have an auditable log of everything that you do only on your devices. That means that pre-internet, the situation was that if you were accused of a crime, then you would produce, and you were innocent, then you could try to produce evidence to prove your innocence. But you couldn't really be mass surveilled for guilt. We now live in a different era where mass pattern matching and all of these different things are happening to basically then be used as evidence against people, and like that's fine if we're putting people in jail for things that we all agree are bad. But that level of power for someone to have, for anyone to wield, is really problematic if it goes in a direction that's just like, well, it's not really what you're saying is a crime isn't really a crime, but the state says it is, and they can mass surveil for it. So everyone, you're going to jail because of whatever it is. Maybe it's being Muslim, maybe it's, I don't know, being super right wing, but like just like privately or whatever, right? Or super left wing, like whatever it is. The point is that absolute power is a dangerous thing for a human to have. The append-only log only living on your device, that brings us back to that time where if you're accused of a crime, you can prove your innocence, like better than ever before, because you have a full log that you can just go, okay, well, just look at my history, no problem. But but you can't be mass surveilled under this approach. So beyond that, there's a bunch of other benefits. If you're transferring files, so like you yourself know, and your producer know that, like, large gigabytes of data, they're a hassle to transfer between devices. Yeah. You have to get some kind of iCloud account. So, and then you have to pay them a monthly fee, and then you might hit limits.
They complain every single time when we upload new files that we've overspent, basically, in capacity.
Well, if it's peer-to-peer, it's free. So you can send terabyte. You can send a terabyte video file if you want. You just drag and drop it into Keet desktop. Now that's synced between your devices. You don't even need to send it to the other device. So if you've got your desktop, you have to leave your desktop on so you can download from it. But if you want to put a video on your desktop Keet and then view it in your mobile Keet or iPad Keet or whatever, then fine, no problem. And it's instant. It's unlimited. There's no monthly fee. There's no complaining about how much data you've used, because a lot of the time you're just doing local network transfer. And the fact that, like, it's 2024, and since we've had this technology, this is where we've ended up. It's absurd. It's patently absurd. It's a monetization strategy, but it's not technologically needful in any way that it works like that.
I mean, it looks like I need it because I don't know of an alternative. But if I can sync between devices, then obviously the middleman I don't need. Because usually I am transferring files from, for example, the studio in the back room there to my laptop or to somewhere that needs the editing.
You can also send to friends and your producer or whatever. So if your producer has Keet and he needs to send you a terabyte video file, he just pings you and says it's coming, and you just get it from him straight away. You can just download it whenever you need to. That's huge, and a lot of people don't really understand that, because again, we've been primed to accept the status quo as is by the profit incentives that have been happening since the 90s. at least the 90s. Because when I was a kid growing up in the 90s, the major thing that brick and mortar people were saying, because I was a little bit in tune, like I got the internet when I was 12, and it was like internet, i.e. 5.5 had just come out, right? And like a lot of brick and mortar people saying like, well, you can't monetize it. You can't monetize the internet. It's not monetizable. And then you had the .com boom and bust and all of that kind of stuff that went on.
Yeah.
But part of that monetizing strategy, of course, was to create a dependency on a centralized approach, because it wasn't conceivable at that time as to how you could monetize the online world without some form of control in the middle. How do you do it without middlemaning? And that's still a question to a certain extent today, but I think that we have enough understanding, like we have enough mind share among the human population, because you need that to start off with, right? From like what's already happened, I don't think it's been bad.
No.
It's just that it's going towards an extreme now that could get very bad, right? And
but
so
very
we need
bad
to
in the
deflect.
power sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Because I've thought of this centralization pattern, right? And how it originated. I understand where we are now. And I don't think it's feasible also looking towards the planet, because I'm now, like I'm a product manager at ING, and I'm actually in the ESG space. And we saw and we analyze absolute emissions, intensity emissions, which are same, but specific to the assets that a company holds, for example. And we saw Microsoft's and their chart with regards to absolute emissions. Nowadays, because of the EU stepping in and regulations changing by, I think, 2040 or 2050, we need to be at a net zero with regards to the companies that operate in the EU. So legislation is making sure that people think about their spend, right? And start giving back on the planet, not just anywhere on the planet, but actually where they do their own business in that way. And with the AI boom that we had somewhere late last year, compute went up ridiculously.
Yeah.
Microsoft was on trend to hit their targets for 2040, for example. And then because of that new technology, compute went up, which means their absolute emissions as the central party that provides that went up as well. And I think nowadays what's interesting is what you're working on now that we have more compute power, let's say locally, because machines and hardware have increasingly
massively
more capabilities.
underused capacities.
It's incredible. Then we don't need this centralization anymore.
Yep.
But then I'm also interested in, with centralization also comes kind of ease of use in some cases, right?
Yeah, well, it's always a trade-off.
It's a trade-off at the end of the day.
But what we're doing is we're making, for the user, the ease of use essentially transparent, like as much as we can, right? So if you use Keet, it feels like a messaging app.
Yeah.
The only real tell is when you send a message, it's fine because we do this thing called blind mirroring. So if you send a message from one device to another and both devices are online, that message is just going to go straight from device to device.
Yeah.
But if you're not online, how does it get to you without a central server? So we have peers that also do hold an encrypted packet for you, an encrypted blob. And then when you're back online, relay that blob to you. Right?
Gotcha.
And so large images or large messages, if you like, text is fine, it's always fine. But once you go into images, like there's a limit to what a peer is going to want to blind mirror. And so the tell within Keet is like, sometimes it will say like, oh, this image is download and Keet works peer to peer or something like that. So like that's an example of the sort of trade-off, right? But like we also have to think about how the system can grow over time, because instead of paying however much you pay for cloud and having all of those issues we discussed, if you want to send images to another peer, or even say terabyte video files or whatever to another peer while that peer is offline, then you could participate in a marketplace where peers who are willing to lend their capacity will do so for a few sats or whatever it is, and so you can commoditize the resource. You're not looking at this monthly subscription model that's like, costs and stuff are factored in, but like, well, what's the margin on that? You have no idea, right? If you commoditize the resources, like it's just a market for commodities, right?
Interesting. We have this concept in the energy market because companies, I mean, I know this because I'm in the ESG space, companies can do, for example, their electricity as a byproduct of whatever their supply chain is most likely going to fall into their scope 2 emissions. And they can offset that. Scope 2 is usually broken down into market and location. And location is on-site, wherever their factory is, for example, the electricity usage would be there, and that would be the absolute emissions. If they then buy energy certificates from people that have solar panels or bigger windmills, they can say they have green energy. And that would go into their location. No, that would go into their market absolute emissions. So what you see is on-site, you have your location emissions, your factory uses electricity. And if I can buy enough energy certificates that say that my energy is green, I basically have greenwashed all my electricity usage. And a company can claim that they use green electricity.
Right.
But they only do that by buying the energy certificates. So they're paying for the compute or paying for the usage that someone else has done.
Yeah.
And me, if I have solar panels, I can actually contribute to that grid. I can say I have these energy certificates. I can sell them to Google or whomever.
I mean, as long as those energy certificates are valid, I mean, it's kind of not the worst thing ever.
No.
It's better than not.
But that's the
it.
existing system that we have.
Yeah.
I've never thought of it to be used with compute because that looks like a missed opportunity or an opportunity we now have with hardware.
Well, we have it with hardware and we have it with a peer-to-peer system because if you try to do this via a centralized entity,
there's no incentive.
Yeah, and it's just going to be very boxed in. You know, you might get some users. You know, if it's a really large, let's say Microsoft tried to do it or something like that. You know, but I think it would be a very self-contained thing, and I think what I'd rather do with the P2P approach is create markets and participate in them. That in itself is a monetization strategy.
Yeah.
But the AI thing you brought up as well plays in here because with centralization, as you noted, investment in AI with a goal to increase centralization has gone bananas in the past few years.
Yeah.
And it's sucking resources from everything else. And I don't know, maybe AI hits a limit. I don't know. It seems to have slightly plateaued, maybe, lately. But either way, I think a much better way to do AI. AI has been thought about for like decades, right? And you've got all of these like, you know, what are the logical extremes of AI? Like, what scenarios can we end up in? You know? And the hyper-centralized scenario is like one of the bad ones because AI gaining sentience, probably unlikely. The bigger threat is a human controlling an AI because an AI can do mass scale kind of things.
Yeah,
the human's bidding.
Yeah.
And again, that's an issue of, you know, it's very Lord of the Rings, but it's, you know, it's an issue of having way too much power, you know. So within a peer-to-peer system, as you mentioned, we have devices that are capable of running local LLMs, right? So you could have a peer-to-peer based LLM that works on your devices with your identity, syncs between devices, knows everything about you, but on your device. So it's the same as just having data on your device. Whereas an AI that knows everything about you that's someone else owns, well, you're vulnerable if that's the case.
Yeah.
And that is the case. We're all vulnerable. So being able to have sort of an AI that's sort of limited by the capacity of your device, it's good, but like, you know, it's not going to compete with what they're putting into very powerful AIs because it comes down to how much compute power they're going to grant it, right? But if we have this marketplace of peers and the commoditization of resources, then AI compute is just another resource.
Yeah.
And from there, users can maybe hook their LLM up. Sorry, too many L's. With another peer to give them additional compute power for that. Like the technological possibilities of this, like whether this is actually possible or not, is like debatable, right? Like this is a research thing for Holepunch. It's not something that's going to be around for a while, but like in terms of envisioning like how that can go in a way that's not hyper-centralized. I think we need to do something like this. Once you have that, then AI becomes our tool, not a hyper centralized, like elitist sort of control tool. You know?
Interesting. I was thinking, so we talked about Keet for a long time, and I can see it from a messaging perspective, as well as kind of the audit of my data being on my devices, or as you mentioned, with that mirroring mechanism being relayed back to me whenever I need it on a new device and my device is just broke. An EMP hit my house and I don't have any devices anymore. Like worst case scenario, I still have my data just by virtue of having it be relayed through other devices. And then I was like, okay, but what about compute, right? This peer-to-peer network, I can see it for video messaging. I can see it for file sharing. But file sharing is a problem I have just because I do podcasting and I have huge gigabytes worth of files. And I would like to keep them, ideally, somewhere. Right now it's on a drive and I don't mind, but I don't know if I could have it by myself if I would choose differently, basically, because I don't have an option currently. Or maybe I do and I don't know about it.
You do have an option if you use Keet.
Exactly,
legit.
Which is something new to me. But then you talked about decentralized compute and I was like, first of all, this sounds very complex, but it still sounds possible, right? Because in essence, that's what the cloud also does with horizontal scaling, with auto scaling in the first place. And sure, they might have bigger machines on a vertical level here and there. You pay a lot, you pay a big premium for that, but horizontal scaling is basically what they do in essence most of the time.
Yeah.
So
with the centralized model, what you're doing is you're sort of designing and building a system, and that system sort of is a self-contained thing, right? What we're doing with Pear is Pear is essentially, I like to call it a software fractal. Like it's a self-repeating piece of infrastructure.
Okay.
Self-repeating piece of infrastructure that builds the system from itself through participation. And if you think of that as a primitive, all the way up to like communication, markets, and different things like that, then the same principles can be applied to storage capacity, AI compute, all the way through. It's just you're turning the system inside out and looking at it from the inside. And if you do that, we are the system. We all participate in the system. And the system is like essentially equally working for all of us.
Do we need to get to a tipping point in adoption before that can happen?
Oh, 100%.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why I said earlier, like, you have to think about how this can play out over time. Because those markets don't exist yet. But the potential for them does, and it's been unlocked by the Pear technology. It's a bit of a journey, you know, and there's multiple avenues that we're exploring around all of this. At the minute, where we're at is we are getting a lot of adoption of Keet. It's very difficult to measure that in a peer-to-peer system. We of course have mobile downloads as they go through the app stores. But there's the DHT you can sort of see the DHT is a global DHT that all peers use, not just Keet. So any Pear application can use the same global DHT. But we sort of roughly know who's like what apps and whatever are using the DHT, and Keet. The presence of Keet is so large in terms of adoption that we can see that spiking DHT usage. So we know that Keet's growing. You won't see a lot of reviews on the App Store and all that kind of stuff, but like if you think about the type of early adopters of like private secret messaging technology, you're not going to get a lot of reviews.
No, those are not the people that leave reviews.
Those aren't the people that leave reviews.
Interesting.
So
if it was not a global DHT, then you would be able to see your usage, right? Because then it would be specific for the network and the participants there. Interesting.
So if you launch your own, you can launch your own Pear app. Using Pear, using the same DHT, but you'll just be like, unless you can grow bigger than Keet, you're not going to be very observable at all.
No.
It's the biggest sort of players that are going to be observable, and that's pretty much Keet at the minute.
Interesting. I wonder if you'll ever get more insights in usage then, because that's, still from an adoption standpoint, and especially when we're talking about that tipping point where more becomes possible, and you have this decentralized opportunities kind of arise by virtue of participation, you want those insights, I would say, no?
Theoretically, but philosophically, not so much, because privacy is an important concern for us, and we don't want to. We have to be very careful. The technology that we can't make trade-offs in the technology that allow for the kind of monitoring that you might want here. Yeah. Right? We can't do that, and we won't do that. So we're actually happier to not know and just let things play out.
Interesting.
And we don't use we're sort of back into early internet kind of development model. We're not doing A/B testing. We're not doing all that kind of stuff. But it's a communication app, right? And so we have plenty of various different Keet rooms, which, by the way, a Keet room can scale infinite. It's not infinitely, but we can scale to planet population size.
Wow.
So theoretically, there might be UI bugs that would stop it from getting all the way there. But theoretically, in terms of the algorithm underlying it, we can scale to the planet. So we have we have a Bitcoin room that's got 1,700 people in it. Last time I checked, might be more now.
Yeah, not bad.
But so we have rooms where people are giving us feedback constantly about the application, and they're using it to give us that feedback. So we have that advantage of making a chat app and people being excited about it, and then using it and giving us feedback. So that works very well. It's more qualitative and certainly more of an art than a science, though.
Yeah, I like the no compromise on technology, because when I said it, I was like, this does sound like my view is kind of anchored by the centralist systems that we use, right?
Absolutely.
And then I was like, okay, yeah, you can measure your usage, and that's the only reason you can measure it is because everyone goes through this kind of funnel in traffic, and then you know usage. But if you don't have that, then how do you measure it? Compromising the technology to be able to measure it, but that will be compromising the technology.
Yeah, I mean, there's maybe other things where we can infer things, very anonymously without compromising the technology, right?
Yeah.
But it's definitely an important principle to keep, that we don't compromise it.
Yeah.
But that thing you said about being anchored in the centralized way of thinking, 100%. Pretty much everyone is.
I think it makes sense, though.
Myself,
those are the systems we use.
Of course. I myself also, and I still have these things where I go, no, wait, I don't need to do that anymore because X, Y, Z, right? And actually what you realize as you start to go down this peer-to-peer path is there's an unbelievable amount of complexity in the current status quo that we all accept as reality. When you go peer-to-peer, things get simpler.
Do they?
Yeah.
That blows my mind.
Yeah,
because
man.
I was thinking, okay, how do you do this? On a software level specifically.
Okay, so sometimes on a software level, things don't get simpler, but once you get it to a user place or a way of reasoning about things, you don't have to go, so it goes through here and then that goes with that, and it's just like A to B,
Directly.
Yeah. But from a software level, you were saying.
Yeah, that's what I mean, that's where my mind was. Because I know you're in the driver's seat and you're creating part of the protocol as well as using it for this application. No?
Not so much the protocol. My thing is the Pear runtime. It's sort of a platform for both running and developing peer-to-peer applications. So
Gotcha.
it's the DevX kind of side of things. It's pulling all of the technologies together to make a coherent user journey for doing this.
Yeah. And would I be able to do that as well?
Yeah, it's really simple, to be honest.
Okay.
You say it's a command line based thing. You say pair run and then a link, and the link can either be a file link, like your file URL, or it can be a pair URL. If it's a pair URL, then that's the first part of that is the key that's for the app that's discovered through the DHT.
Okay.
And if it's a file, it runs from disk. So that's running an app. To get an app to be discoverable through the DHT, you have your project folder and you just run pair stage and you give it a channel name. And then that generates a key for your app and synchronizes the disk contents into a hypercore that I mentioned earlier. Then you do pair seed, and you use the same channel name. And then it just seeds from your machine. Then you can go to another machine, or someone else can run it, and they can do pair run, and the pair link that the stage command and the seed command gave you, same link. That's it.
Okay.
That's it. That's the whole thing. There's other stuff beside that. There's pair release for like managing release markers and different things like that.
Yeah.
So you can say like this. So it's an append-only log, right? Every file that you synchronize to it increases the length of the log. So whenever you say, okay, well, this length, that's the official release, but I can keep on staging, and then I can look at preview releases. So I can do pair run checkout staged, or pair run checkout staging, to see the preview release of a product. But when I just run it with pair run, then I'm just looking at the app. Beyond that, what we do with Keet is we have a downloadable DMG for Mac and exe installer.
That's what I used. Yeah.
Yeah. And all that is a Genesis pair build, and that Genesis pair build runs pair run.
Does exactly that.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it.
Wow.
So we haven't got this yet, but we've got a pair build command coming. There's some complexity on Windows to still figure out, because Windows is Windows.
Oh yeah.
Anything that takes us like a day on Linux and Macs takes like 2 weeks on Windows if it's a little bit a little bit weird, you know.
Push that back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we have a pair build command coming, so that once you've staged your app and whatever, you can just say, okay, now I want to build it, and all it does is create these same wrapper files that just do pair run of your app key, and then users can download it, and it just feels like a normal app to them, the same way Keet does.
Very interesting. I'm definitely going to play around with it, I think, because I love what you're doing currently. I love when people are working on newer technologies that might actually be truly disruptive, right? Because people usually label technologies as disruptive, but I think it's always debatable. But I think something like this, which would change the way that we operate, as well as even the incentives and the structures, the hugest pillars that we have, and would kind of decentralize them, I think is fascinating.
Yeah, because within all of that I just said, there is no infrastructure other than the machine that runs it and the machine that seeds it, right? That's it. That's a peer-to-peer situation.
Yeah.
I did quite a bit of consultancy, and in order to, you had to have a bit of a margin at the beginning of a lot of consulting gigs, because you first few days you can't do anything, because you have to figure out, there's a VPN. Oh, okay. I need to set up my exec host file so that it redirects this IP to that. Oh, okay.
Who gives me access?
Who do I? Oh, they won't give me access because I'm not on the employee register. Oh, okay. So how do I get around that? You know, and so like, there's so much friction in the way, even just for onboarding new devs into centralized companies. The wastage, the cost on compute and all of that, it's really wild. I think in some countries, I think in the USA and so forth, it's written off as you've got capex and opex, right? And the tax incentives on opex are different on capex, right? So to a certain extent, there's even within, and I don't fully understand this, but like I might be wrong on this, but my understanding is that the systems themselves sort of incentivize this approach of just spending tons of money on infrastructure and staffing infrastructure, which is interesting, because it's like, a centralized government is trying to incentivize centralized companies, but I don't think that was an explicit attempt to do that. No. But it's just an inherent bias in the system.
Exactly. How did you end up kind of collaborating with Holepunch and doing what you do now? Because I think it's fascinating, this vision, and it sounds like you're really driven by it. Like I talked to you now, I talked to you in previous conversations. I love the energy and the passion that comes from it, but I'm really curious how you ended up here, because I've seen this kind of on the sidelines, but you dove head first, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a long story.
Well, we're doing a podcast. Go ahead.
So I started programming when I first saw a line of code when I was 5 years old. And this guy who was into computers came around and plugged a Commodore in, and he wrote 10 print David, 20 go to 10, and I was like mind blown. I was like, whoa, that's my name, and it's doing it over and over again, and all you needed to do was type that. And like I was thinking about that for a long time. And when I was 9, I got my hands on an Atari, and at a boot fair. That's like a garage sale, boot fair, flea market, all the same sort of thing.
Okay.
People call them different things, but where I grew up in the southeast, and they call them boot fairs there.
Yeah.
And of the UK, and I got my hands on a programming basic book. So I sort of taught myself basic through, that.
At 9.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And then when I was 12, as I said, like IE 5.5 had just come out, right? And I had a single mum, but she sort of recognized my like penchant, for computers. And I think she had 2 jobs, and she had 2 jobs. So she got me the computer, and she got me a dial-up modem.
Yeah.
And back then, like dial-up was super expensive and stuff. So I'd dial up, load a page. Back in the day, like there were these websites called JavaScript goodies and HTML goodies. And I used those websites to learn HTML, JavaScript, and CSS.
Okay.
And I just like dial up, load a page, and then cut it off to like try and save money. I later found out that the dial-up is the most expensive part.
You kept doing that over and over. Yeah. That's hilarious.
And like throughout my childhood, I destroyed my uncle's computer. I destroyed my grandma's computer. I destroyed my own computers many times, and I'd always just be able to. I would destroy something and then fix it, and that's sort of how I learned as well. But I definitely irritated the extended family with my shenanigans.
But on a software level, or like physically destroy the...
Oh, I didn't take a baseball bat to it or anything like that. I would just be like, oh, what's this? Can I have a go on your computer, please? Yeah. And then they'd be like, oh, yeah, sure. He's a bit of a whiz kid, And
it just breaks.
And then I'd get into like, oh, what kind of computer is this? Like, my uncle's an engineer, and he had some kind of, I don't know. I think it was maybe POSIX based or something, but you could run Lemmings from the command line on it. And I was trying to do that, and then I just got distracted, and I was like, what's this do? What's that do? And then the next thing, broken,
I love the driver of curiosity and how powerful that can be.
Absolutely.
That's incredible.
And I think ultimately that's the question of how I ended up here. Like that's the ultimate route, following curiosity and also just saying like, hey, do we have to be like this? Do we have to? I don't think we do. Like, humans aren't bees. Bees have to be bees. They have to be a worker bee. They have to be a whatever bee they are. But humans self-organize and take up roles as they see fit. And like, so I don't know. I just think there's a really interesting connection between technology, communication, and how we organize ourselves,
Yeah.
But so skip forward to like about age 23 or so.
Okay.
I didn't realize that being able to do these sorts of things with computers was actually a valuable skill.
Okay.
In my head, I was just like, well, anyone can do that. It's like washing dishes or, you know what I mean?
It's probably normalized because you did it so early on.
Yeah, it was just normalized. Yeah. So, I was working at McDonald's and then I worked at various different places. I worked in like a bank for a while as a cashier and like McDonald's, but after that I worked in a homeless hostel, and it was 12-hour night shifts and 12-hour day shifts. I do 2 12-hour days and 2 12-hour nights.
Damn.
And on the nights I started to build a website for the hostel, which was all cool. And then I started getting like people sort of paying me to do websites for them, and I'd sort of do that little bit on the nights because like you'd have like this 5 hour sort of period where everyone's asleep. Not always, because things sometimes went mad because it's a homeless hostel, but like sometimes. And then I started thinking, I was doing PHP and stuff, and I started thinking, I need to find a way to make these applications more real time. You know, started looking at Ruby on Rails, and then I came across Node.js, and at this point it was about 0.8.
Okay,
and I was just like, whoa. And at the same time, I came across Bitcoin, and Bitcoin at the time was like 2 pence a Bitcoin.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And I looked at both of them. I was like, well, I don't really have much time, so I can only really go in one direction. And I'm trying to like, you know, build websites and stuff. So I'll go look into the Node thing, and I'll leave the Bitcoin thing for now.
Life decision right there.
I even at the time I was like, oh, if I can just put a 10 pound into it or something like that. But even at that time, £10 was a lot to me for various other reasons, right? So I went into looking into Node, and at the time there were no books on it. There were, but they were just rehashes of the docs. And one of them was just garbled nonsense, and the two other were rehashes of the docs. So I contacted a publishing company because I was like, well, I'm looking at the raw code here and look at the raw code of Express and like figuring it out. So I wonder if I can get a publisher to just pay me to do that, and then it'll incentivize me to do it. So I did a proposal with Pack Publishing, and then it was just, I think at the timing was just right, and they were absolutely, yes, let's do it. So I ended up writing Node Cookbook, and then I did 3 more editions over the years.
Awesome.
But with that, because I was living in Northern Ireland at the time, I did a bit of asking around on the Google, because at the time it was like the Google forums, Google something.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, there's actually a conference happening. Someone said there's actually a conference happening in Dublin, and it was the first Node Conf.
Okay.
And so I can't remember exactly how it all happened, but basically I went down and they gave a shout out for the book while I was there, you know,
Nice.
as a thing. And
Because you were there, or just in general?
well, I sort of talked to them before I went down, and they're like, come on down, we'll do a shout out for the book and stuff, you know.
Good stuff.
At the time I was working for this company called Pace, which do like the Sky set-top boxes, like TV set-top boxes and stuff like that.
Okay.
And they had interfaces in JavaScript and HTML. Yeah.
Nice.
So I was building like sort of Netflix style kind of navigation stuff for them. But the people that organized NodeConf was a company called Nearform. And Nearform were very early in their at that time, but they were bullish on Node, and they were very shortly after bullish on microservices. Very ahead of the wave there. So I ended up working with them through knowing them from the conference, going down and speaking at meetups and different things like that, and they hired me as their head of training.
Gotcha.
But I ended up going way further into the consultancy side of things with the consultancy team. So Nearform at the time was building really cool stuff for companies that needed to update, and we went into sort of the realm of digital transformation, and that's like, so you're going from like Node, because Node is JavaScript in general as an invented language is very good for mediation. That's why Pear is also JavaScript. Like the being able to mediate between within an event loop within an invented language, the cohesion is really great. So once you start thinking digital transformations, you come across Conway's law, and Conway's law is the idea that there's a relationship between communication and technology. If you have dysfunctional communication in an organization, that organization produces dysfunctional technology. And I'd argue that most of the technology we use today is in some ways dysfunctional. Dysfunctional to us as people, in some cases, but not necessarily dysfunctional to the organization, because it's intentional that they, for instance, don't allow you to give feedback on certain things because they control the app experience to that level, right? That sort of thing. But even the unintentional stuff leaks out, you know? So what we did with the digital transformation stuff was outline a path for companies to move on to a technology architecture that tweaks the way they communicate at the same time. And if you can do that, you can kind of double bubble it, where you give them the digital transformation they need in technology, but you've also got to work with them at the sort of front lines and the executive suite levels to basically be like, this isn't just technology, this is culture.
Yeah.
And honestly, from my perspective, you needed that to kind of grease the wheels, because it's like this, you know, when something's very, very large, I don't think you need that. But when it's at a certain scale, even when it's quite large, you still need that sort of greasing of the wheels, as I say. But I think from my observations, what it seemed like to me is that a lot of the time it's to do with the major factor is a technology change, because executives change over time, frontliners change over time, but the culture and the way things are done are constrained by the technology. So one of the things that I did quite a bit of was creating conventions of how to develop within an organization, but then enforcing that through actual tools and code, which I'd written specifically for that purpose. So, or used from the open source world. Like a really obvious one is like a pre-commit hook, which, as an example, like if you need to lint your code before you commit it, right?
Yeah.
And you say, okay, everyone, we're all linting our code before I commit it. Cool. Everyone goes, yeah, no problem. And then no one lints their code.
No.
Right? And so, okay, so you put CI in maybe, and then now you're constraining it so the unlinted code doesn't get into the code base. But you're still using up CI resources by not doing it. You take it onto the user's machine, the pre-commit hook runs, and now they can't commit unless they fix the linting issues.
Yeah.
So that technology constraint, like as small as it is, can have a massive difference as you scale it up. If you have thousands of people suddenly using a pre-commit hook, like the reduction on CI compute is massive.
Yeah.
But also the communication changes. People aren't mad at each other anymore for not linting their code.
Because it doesn't happen as often.
Well, because it doesn't happen at all, because they can't commit unless they force it, and then that's a whole different situation.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, but then like that's different to being like, oh, sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, no,
that's
I
like
agree.
I've deliberately, and so now the communication's clearer, and you can deal with it more.
Yeah,
the technology is clarified, and now there's less dysfunction. Like that's just a super small example, but you see how like something small can have a big effect.
Yeah,
and so with all the consultancy and all of that, I was also speaking at conferences, and I spoke at a conference in Oslo about microservices. And someone else was there doing a talk about Merkle DAGs.
Okay. Very specific.
Yeah. So Bitcoin uses Merkle trees. You've heard of this before?
No.
I'm probably gonna butcher this explanation.
Okay.
But basically it's to do with you know how you've got the blockchain and then you've got like the hashes of the hashes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like somewhere in there there's this thing called the Merkle tree that's part of that whole blockchain process, right?
Okay.
Merkle DAGs are a kind of inverted tree, something graph, I can't remember, which is funny because it was Matthias Booz who gave the talk, and he's the CEO of Holepunch now. And we had a chat at the end, and I was like asking him more questions about the Merkle DAGs, but that. It's pretty funny. I can't explain it now.
Is it out of curiosity purely?
Yeah. Well, I was like, wow, this is really interesting.
Yeah.
But remember, like, I'd looked at Node and Bitcoin at the same time, and I'd read the solving of the two generals problem white paper, the Satoshi white paper, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like very, very early on, And so when I saw him talking about this stuff, I was like, whoa. Because
Yeah.
I've been all doing the consultancy thing and like, I would do 3-month gigs. So I'm going in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out.
Completely different.
Yeah. And so, but I'd also had an awareness of Bitcoin and what it was doing and stuff. Like, I don't know, personally, I guess I'm a maxi because I don't really rate the other coins. Like the breakthrough was Bitcoin. Everything else is experimentation.
Extra.
Yeah, it's experimentation and that then led to, well, that didn't lead to it, but then skip forward a bit further, and Matthias is actually working with Nearform also as a consultant and as a specialist in general.
Oh, okay.
We also did performance work. Myself, Matteo Collina, and Matthias Booz were performance specialists as well. Like, how do you make the code really, really fast? That's another thing. Is like if you can speed up the speed at which a technology runs within an organization, then you still have an effect on the communication, right?
Yeah.
So Matthias had been experimenting with peer-to-peer stuff from. He's Danish, right? So like the Danish sort of education system is fantastic, and you've sort of given time to explore and all of that. So he's come out of the education system, got his, I think, his math degree or whatever it is, and then he's been like, oh, I like BitTorrent or whatever, right? And he started messing around with that, right?
Yeah.
And gone from there. Fast forward a bit later, and he's created this thing. There was this thing called DAT, which was an academic funded program for transferring large amounts of data because academia has a need for that, right? And they, back then there wasn't even really cloud offerings, so this was like really novel. So DAT was born from that, and then and there's like a whole DAT community around this that exists online. That's a peer-to-peer community. Shout out to the DAT community. But within DAT, there's hypercore. So the primitives of DAT, which after a while sort of dwindled off.
Okay.
They went into a company that Matthias then started called Hyperdivision.
Okay.
So Hyperdivision was a consulting company for peer-to-peer stuff. So they're able to work with like crypto trading platforms and all that kind of thing to create like peer-to-peer systems that work within that company. Because a peer-to-peer approach, can actually be a lot more efficient. And when you're talking about trading and different things like that, and you're talking about robustness and anti-fragility, these things come into play with peer-to-peer systems. So that continued the investment into the stack. Fast forward a little bit later, and I decided I also did this thing with Nearform where, or with the OpenJS Foundation, the Linux Foundation. I've written the JavaScript Node application developer and JavaScript Node services developer certifications and exams. It started as a community project and all of that, but I'm the author and lead. And it came to a point within Nearform where it seemed like it was time to sort of step away, but carry on doing that stuff. So I stepped away, carried on doing that stuff, and then went freelance for a bit. And I just did some freelance sort of stuff with I worked with TELUS a little bit, the Canadian Telecom,
okay,
and some other stuff. And then Matthias contacted me, and I was just in between kind of gigs, and he said, "Are you up to much?" And I was like, "No." And from there, I went to Denmark and met this guy, our CTO called Andrew.
Okay.
Andrew Walsh. He's from a sort of technology neuroscience background, and is really the extremely good algorithmic kind of programmer.
Okay.
In terms of the peer-to-peer algorithms and stuff, so, as is Matthias, but they bring different things, right?
Interesting.
So we started talking then, and there's one other guy, who wasn't there at the time, but this was the other guy that's involved, was Chris Diedrichs. He's like a guy from a chemistry background who found out that he really liked thinking through cryptographic algorithms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he's our cryptographer, but he can also code. So he's a coding cryptographer, whereas Andrew is a coder who writes the things on top of the cryptographic algorithms, but like the sort of communication algorithms. And a bunch of other stuff. He's the CTO. So anyway, we started talking about a microkernel. That's what we called it at the time.
Okay.
Which is essentially what Pear became. And it's just a platform for a cross-platform, cross-operating system platform for running Pear applications, or for running peer-to-peer applications. We didn't call it Pear at that time.
I love the name, by the way, when it comes to peer-to-peer and Pear.
Yeah, it's so
Genius.
good. It's so good.
Yeah.
That was Paolo, our chief strategy officer. He's the CEO of Tether and a bunch of other stuff as well. He came up with that name. Where was I? Sorry.
Microkernels.
Microkernel. Yeah. Sorry. So
no worries.
So we started talking about that, and that's sort of where we sort of formed the basis of what we were going to do with Holepunch. And we hired our first front end guy, JB, right in the early days. And what I did is I just wrapped Electron in a command line thing where we could, before Pear was called Pear, it was called Holepunch. And you just wrote Holepunch dev. And then that just opened Electron with like a file watcher reload thing.
Okay.
So Keet when we started building Keet, we built it with this Holepunch dev command, just like straight in Electron. And so Keet development could start in parallel. We had immediate utility.
Well,
and we could keep on building this microkernel. So that's what we did, and we kept on with it until we got to like multi-platform, multi-app. Sorry. So we made it so that Pear can run like multiple applications with a sidecar situation. When it started out, all it could do was run one peer-to-peer app, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, because the thing is like it's this really Pear runtime really is this very sort of it's supposed to be as thin as possible, sort of lateral piece of code, because most of what we want to do is we want to keep all of the core functionality and everything outside of the core. We want that in ecosystem modules because we can iterate those as fast as we like, you know what I mean? And like you've got semver control and all that kind of stuff. This is the normal sort of development process that people can use. Yeah. And we want to keep the core as small as possible because that minimizes breakage. We don't have any like codependency issues or anything like that, right? So we could start build once we could support the native primitives in Electron for the P2P stuff, then we could just use the modules that are already available as open source modules like Hypercore, Hyperdrive, Autobase, and so forth to build the Keet app. And at the same time, the Pear runtime platform is being built using those same modules to facilitate, like say, Pear Stage and Pear Seed and those things I mentioned earlier, right? All the sort of DevX and deployment features. And then once we were at a place where we were like, okay.
When was this in time, by the way? 2020s or?
Oh man, I'm so bad at timelines. So we went open source on February 14th of this year.
This year.
So Valentine's Day.
That's when I saw the first.
It's a Valentine's Pear.
Yeah, nice.
But we decided that we would go live, I think, roughly October the year before.
Gotcha.
And that's where we were like, we could go live now, but we'll do it really well, you know. So yeah, that's really how it all came to be.
It's almost been a year that it's live then also.
Yeah. And we've got a release coming out today. Actually, 1.40 should be going out today, or at least this week. But that, if you watch me, I'll often say we've got a release coming this week, and sometimes it's not. Yeah, we're releasing at the minute. I've had a few like big releases because we've had to wait for something else, and so while you're waiting for something else, more things are happening, and so it's like chunking out the release. But I want to get it to like smaller incremental releases as soon as we can.
Gotcha.
So after this one, probably try and do more rapid releases. Our release strategy is really cool as well, actually, because when you stage to a drive, we also have this command called pair dump.
Okay.
So we have a development key that we just use internally, and then we dump. Then I use that development key to verify everything's fine. So I run from that key, and then I can dump from that key into another folder, and then I stage that folder. So then that folder is now my staging key, which is like what we use like for everyone in the organization, QA and everything, checks that everything's working on the staging key. And then we dump from the staging key to the release candidate key. Same thing, same process again, but the release candidate key is different. And this is something that we need to put into the DevX of Pear. We don't have like a really easy way to do this right now, but the release candidate key is a multi-sig key.
Okay.
And we've got a Keet room that where the stakeholders are in the Keet room, and you need 3 out of 5 signatures in order to sign off on a release on that key.
Interesting.
Sorry, that's the RC, not the RC key. The RC key is the one before the production key. The production key is multi-sig, sorry. So we go dev key, stage key, RC
Release
key.
candidate.
Release candidate gets the most rigor applied to it, and that's the one with the changelog, and it's the final thing. And then that goes on to the production key, and then you have to have 3 out of 5 multi-sig signatures. Again, this is all decentralized. It's all completely peer-to-peer.
Yeah.
And that's how we control gate production.
Nice.
Yeah.
Was that there from the start, or how did it grow to that organically? Because that's quite an elaborate approach. And I love the multi-sig at the end as well.
Yeah, so it started out with just my dev key, which we were using internally, and then we were like, well, we better put a staging key on there. And then we went, okay, well, we probably need to do multi-sig. And so then we had a production key, and it's like, let's put an RC key in the middle. But the thing is like, because it's just peer-to-peer and there's no like infrastructure to configure or anything like that, you can just do that.
Yeah.
Like you can just inject, it's just your process. It's like whatever you want, bro, like whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
It's so flexible, and we probably will evolve it more in future. But the using the Keet room to do the multi-sig is a key thing here, because there's this real symbiosis between Keet and Pear, because you've got this communication layer, and you've got and within that communication layer you have identities, and then you have this ability to author peer-to-peer apps, right? And that's brings me neatly to authoring with identity. So this isn't a feature yet. It's coming out soon.
Okay.
We're waiting on a few things in the stack to be done. It's all about prioritization.
At the end, yeah.
So when you create a Keet identity, you can grant a sub-identity to Pear. And if you do that, Pear will then sign your applications with that sub-identity.
Okay.
So you can then release a peer-to-peer application, and we can know that it's Patrick in this Keet room, that guy, that identity is behind this application. And now we have essentially a web of trust.
Yeah.
Because when you run an app, even currently, if you try to run a Pear app, it'll say, do you trust this application if you've never run it before? What we'll upgrade that to is saying, do you trust the application, or do you want to trust the author? If you trust the author, you'll run any of their applications.
Yeah.
Or we could have like a time, we could do many things with that. So we're now at a place nearly where there is an interaction between Keet and Pear platform. But there's no reason you can't grant sub-identities to other applications as well.
Also from Keet, yeah.
Yeah. So what you then have is this like immutable identity social space that isn't centralized. The data and the identity is still inherently valuable, but we don't have to centralize to avail of that value. The ability for other apps to use Keet. Imagine a gaming app, right? You use your Keet identity, you grant your Keet identity to the gaming app, and now that's who you are within that gaming app.
Yeah.
Or a trading app. Like these things, like there's varying levels of trust here, but like once you know that a person is a person, and that's represented to you by Keet, And you can also verify. We should actually make some command line tools to verify this at a software level. But cryptographically speaking, that is that person or someone using that person's device, which means that they're responsible for it.
Exactly.
So you can't spoof this. And that's going to be so powerful moving forward. And that really does open up the way for the commoditization of resources and compute as well. That's one of the essential components to that.
I love it, man. I think this conversation, especially, and I had a previous conversation with Adewale Abati, and he's also in the Web5 space. He talked a lot about identity. Like, I've been on this kind of rabbit hole also with guests, and you can see it probably. But I'm going to look forward to re-listening to this episode and diving deeper into this technology because I think it's fascinating. Before we round off, is there anything you still want to share with the audience listening?
One thing I was trying to say earlier that I forgot to say was about the terabyte transfer stuff. The other thing about it is if you don't have a centralized entity in the middle, then you don't have any incentivization to compress the video feed.
Oh yeah.
So when you're doing a live stream, Keet also has this broadcast feature. I don't think we have video broadcast yet, but it's coming. You could broadcast again to the entire planet if you wanted to. Again, hypothetically, but try and break it. Like seriously, try and go big. You'll struggle to break it. It's really good. You could do like Twitch style kind of broadcast in the highest quality possible.
Lossless.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because what we actually had to do was we had to add a button to Keet to reduce the quality of the video feed that you're sending out. Because otherwise, and we set it on average quality, because if everyone's setting high quality, the CPU thrashes and so on and so forth, right? It's too much for the devices.
Yeah.
And we'll do more stuff around that and a lot more things in terms of we don't have recordings yet, right? That would be a really good feature to have.
If I ever do remote podcast episodes again, I'll definitely try it out.
Yeah, you want the recording button to be there. I mean, like, if you don't have a recording button, you can just record your screen, but what we really want to do is take the original highest quality sources of every video stream, even if people aren't doing highest quality, and then get those transferred to the Pear that wants the composite, but it should composite them automatically, and then you get this really high quality result of your stream. Which again, prioritization, things to do. But yeah, so just to shout out, like, Keet isn't just a text messaging app. And video and audio, they work on mobile. They work really well. Any bugs you see are probably going to be UI stuff, not the actual algorithm. And there's still a lot of iteration going on UI and stabilization happening at the moment. Like, lots of investment in quality and stuff. So it should be stable moving forward as well.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Yeah. This has been a blast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, man. This was it was a lot of fun. I'm going to round it off here. I'll put all David's socials in the description below, as well as some useful links for you to read up on. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.